been out there for 70 years since the Depression. They pay you to let your land go fallow. I don't think that's a good idea to pay people not to farm.
But, I mean, obviously that was done to prop up food prices, to keep a crash from happening and make farming, allow it to stay profitable so people want to continue to do it.
I know, but our farmers are the greatest. We have the greatest farm production anywhere in the world. We are better at it than anywhere in the world. Instead of letting and paying our farms to go fallow, let's grow more and export it. Let's become a great exporter like we used to be.
I don't disagree with you on that. I got the phone lines are open now. I'm done with my questions. 571-8484. I know. Good thing I'm lofting all these softballs at you today, like I'm accused of all the time. 571-8484. 1-800-444-8484. Scott, you're on 84 WHAS.
Hey, how are y'all doing today?
Good.
Rand, I've got a question for you. And it's got to do with the vision of the Tea Party, and you've been on the inside. There have been a number of attempts by third parties to make a presence in Washington, and we all know that you won't get a committee seat unless you're of a Republican or a Democrat. Ross Perot tried it with the Reform Party. The Green Party has tried it. What's the long-term vision of the Tea Party? Are they going to try and stand alone and be an independent party or part of an arm of the Republican Party?
And I'm going to let you listen off the air, Scott, so turn your radio back on.
Most of the Tea Partiers that I meet say that they want to influence the structure we have, and they realize that it's very hard to start a third party and almost impossible. And I see it as the Tea Party being a bunch of conservative, reform-minded constitutionalists. I do see, though, that while they tend to be more Republican, they're very honest in that they say, you know what, there's chastisement for both parties. Both parties have done a crummy job on the deficit, and we have to do better. I see myself, if I'm elected as a Republican, being an independent voice within the Republican caucus, and I will not be afraid when Republicans spend too much money to tell them we're not going to do it. When Republicans are in charge, if we introduce a budget that's $500 billion in debt, I will vote no. And that's the kind of independence I think Kentucky wants, and I think that's the kind of independence the Tea Party wants.
I personally think that the Tea Party's greatest legacy will be the education of the people who attend these rallies, and then the self-education that happens because they're intellectually inspired by what they hear. I think that's going to be a fantastic thing that comes out of the Tea Party. Jonathan, you're on 84 WHAS.
Yeah, I have a question. I consider myself to be an extremely conservative Republican. I've been a Republican my whole life, but I voted for Reagan and all that, but I seem to think that it's misguided to lump the stimulus package and the TARP together. And, going back to the old conservative Milton Friedman School of Economics and Monter's theory, what do you see would have happened if there had been a sudden contraction in the money supply had the banks not been stabilized?
I agree that the stimulus package and TARP are different, and there are some good people who do justify it. I'm reading Steve Forbes' book right now, and he's by no means a liberal, and he justifies it and says government created that problem. But what I would say is the problem that occurred in the housing crisis was government created in the sense that the Federal Reserve set interest rates too low. They spurred an inflationary boom in houses, and then through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they encouraged more and more reckless lending, and they encouraged having rules where people put no money down, and then all of a sudden things changed and reversed, and they didn't predict it. But these were Bernanke and Geithner, and then we reappointed the very people who messed the system up.
So I take it you would not be in favor of a reappointment of Bernanke?
Absolutely not. I think he didn't predict it coming. He was part of the problem. And to tell you the truth, what they're doing right now is exactly what they did between 2003 and 2007. They have interest rates below the market rate. They're trying to encourage a housing boom, and it's not going to happen this time. I fear we're entering into a second phase of a recession.
Well, the only good news about encouraging the housing boom now is that I just read a stat this morning in my email. 30% of home sales have been people buying foreclosures. So they're obviously getting a deal. We may not not be in the same situation where people were buying houses at the top of the market that they couldn't afford in the first place.
Right.
So it may be a little bit better this time around.
Maybe. We're doing it at low interest rates, though, that are made artificially low by the Federal Reserve, and I think sometimes that leads to an inflationary cycle within it, and then a correction. And so instead of a boom-bust cycle that may not be as extreme, the Federal Reserve makes that boom-bust cycle quite extreme.
We're going to take a very quick time out. Back in a moment with one more segment of your phone calls. Get on board, 571-8484 or 1-800-444-8484 for Dr. Rand Paul after this on 84 WHAS. 84 WHAS. So we are in the studio with Dr. Rand Paul taking your questions. And I just got a reminder that I wanted to point out. Dr. Dan Mangiardo, who was the opponent of your opponent in the primary, not really picking sides. He basically said, I'm not going to do an endorsement in this race.
Well, I think one of the interesting things from that is, there are a lot of conservative Democrats in Kentucky, and I think they're going to have trouble, struggling with the liberal policies of Conway and the liberal policies of President Obama. And so we plan on working very hard to outreach to the conservative Democrats to say, you know what?
He's not representing what you think.
Yeah, Conway's going to be too liberal.
I wouldn't know because he hasn't come on the show in a very long time, so I'm hoping he does so I can get his opinion straight from the horse's mouth. Roger, you're on with Dr. Rand Paul on 84 WHAS.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning.
I think we ought to have as many of those oil skimming devices as we can down there in the Gulf of Mexico. And if the private sector cannot or will not produce them, I think the government ought to be working 24/7 to produce them constantly until we get that oil leak stopped. I was wondering what the doctor thought about this.
Absolutely, Roger. In fact, 3 days after Katrina hit, President Bush waived the Jones Act and said foreign ships could help us down there and foreign countries could help. Right now, they still haven't waived the Jones Act. We have 17, actually they did yesterday.
Last night, yes.
Last night.
It came out in a press release from the State Department that essentially said, and there will be no further questions.
So we have 17 countries that have offered these massive oil skimming ships to us, but how long's it been?
71 days.
71 days, and President Obama has said no because he's protecting the unions. He's saying, no, we're going to keep the Jones Act and we won't take the help of all these countries. And then he tried to prevent all the governors. Bobby Jindal down there has been wanting to protect the Louisiana coast. My opinion is that government and business should work together, not as enemies, but to clean it up and prevent the oil from getting to the shores. And I think we haven't done a good enough job because government's gotten in the way instead of saying government should help with business to clean the mess up.
But doesn't this clearly, absolutely paint a clear picture on how we should not rely on the federal government, because it's this giant behemoth of bureaucratic paperwork. You can't expect a quick response from the federal government.
It may be that you need to let states have more autonomy in trying to fix problems early on, because Bobby Jindal had asked for 3 weeks to try to put booms out there, and they were preventing him from doing that. But it still needs to be a combination of everything. The state governments, BP obviously paying for and cleaning up, and the federal government as well.
What do you think about the BP slush fund?
Well, I think the interesting thing about it is, when you look back and forth, there needs to be enough money there so there's not going to be a bankruptcy determined and no money to pay for cleanup. So I think everybody in Kentucky, everybody in America wants BP to pay for the cleanup. And so how we practically get to that is another question. Who has the authority, whether it's Congress, the president? They're all kind of complicated aspects to it, but absolutely they do. One interesting thing I heard about the other day is that, in the days leading up to the explosion, there were already regulators there that knew that there were fissures.
Right.
These are President Obama's team of regulators who then ignored the information. After the accident, they shut down all drilling in the whole Gulf of Mexico. But you know what? One person within President Obama's administration could have shut down production on that platform, and there already were signs that they weren't doing their job with existing regulations. That's a real problem, and I think something really significant is going to come out of that when we finally have hearings on why wasn't President Obama's administration obeying their own rules on regulating the oil industry.
You really think that's going to come out in the show trials that'll happen on TV, honestly?
I think emails don't go away, and they've got an email apparently that says that the mining safety folks knew of fissures or cracks and let this mining process go on, and this is with existing regulations.
Right.
And so this is why I think it's important that we know what happened, who knew what when, and who wasn't doing their job.